Welcome to the Access RUMERTIME Conversation Show. My name is Yvonne Laria, and I am one of your hosts.
My name is Georges Prosper, and I'm also one of your hosts.
Hello, my name is Vanessa Kelly-Rue, and I am also host.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lynn Kaluit Prosper, and I am also a host.
Good evening, everyone. So glad to be back with this team this evening on this Access RUMERTIME conversation. I am Dr. Geneva Fleming. Looking forward to this conversation this evening.
So this evening, today, we are going to talk about relationships. Relationships.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Every one of us is in some type of relationship. I know there's a statement that I have, and it says, as air is to life, so are social emotional competencies to relationships. The same way we need air to breathe and live, we absolutely need social emotional skills to have relationships.
Yep.
Now, what kind of relationships are we talking about? I know Geneva, earlier this afternoon, Geneva said, well, what kind of relationships are we going to talk about? We'll talk about, relationship management skills. What makes up a healthy relationship? How do we navigate relationships? And I think that's something that most people want to know about.
Yeah, that's true.
I totally agree.
It's a struggle to talk about how we truly feel about relationship. And for me, when I think about relationship, I have to go back to the first relationship I ever had, which was with my parents. And I looked at their relationship and I saw some things that I wanted. I saw some things that I did not want. And then based off of that, I think I'm ready to have a relationship. I'm thinking about individuals probably have never seen a positive relationship. And I'm wondering, can we truly have a healthy relationship with another person if we've never seen what healthy looks like? And sometimes normal to someone might be watching domestic violence take place at all times. Sometimes normal can be watching someone take finances as the most important aspect of a relationship and say, that's all I'm going to focus on. And I think that's one of the things, because we don't know what normal is until we find someone normal. And then
what is normal?
What is normal?
Yeah. Do you define what my normal is and I define what your normal is?
No.
Who gives anybody the right to do that?
Come on.
So Geneva, what were you going to say?
Absolutely. As I was listening to George's share, and what he's sharing is absolutely correct. And so it leads me to the question that should be asked is, how did we learn about relationships, and what did we learn about relationships? I was watching a video recently, and the author described the process of how people are socialized in this in this world. He referred to it as the domestication of humans. Quite relevant to the topic of talking about relationships and normal. And you asked the question about norms and who decides what's normal, because everybody have their own norm based on how they were socialized into their space, into their setting, be it family, school, community. And this is a very deep conversation. I'm just wondering how far do we go to unpack this, because we learn from our first teachers, those individuals who began to impart information into us, and we receive those things as quote unquote normal. And then they further became normalized as we continue to grow and become engaged in other institutions, other systems beyond the family systems. And if those systems, promote the same things that my family system was promoted or tolerated certain things, then it really does become normal. But as I shared earlier in an earlier conversation about mindsets. I mean, people become fixed in a certain way of thinking. And as a person thinks, so they believe. And as they believe, that's how they behave. And that's, how they act. So it's a very it's quite a thick onion, but it's worth peeling the skin back to get to the core of the issue. It truly is. Because what Georges was saying is foundational to a topic that I wanted to raise, and it has to do with rebound relationship. Why do people jump? I call it relationship hopping. When one relationship goes south, they just jump into another relationship, and then they bring damage to that relationship. So it's because within themselves, they're not managing themselves. They're not managing their actions. They're not managing their thoughts and their interaction with others. And they take baggage from one relationship to the next, their own. I believe I heard Georges mention the term earlier, prior to us talking tonight, about toxic and toxicity. And so the toxicity could be within that individual that's relationship hopping. It's almost like passing around a disease. As I'm sitting here talking.
So
really,
Geneva,
yes.
Let's get the other host into this first part of the conversation.
Okay.
Where we're talking about we got to define what we taught. We talked about in terms of relationship, what makes a relationship, what makes it healthy. So let's hear from Lynn and Vanessa about what we started off talking about before we get into the other aspects of it.
Okay.
Just to piggyback off of what Georgia said, piggyback off of what Georgia said in terms of how do we know what a healthy relationship is, and you said, well, what is the normal healthy relationship? And it's true, it is a very relative question, but we have to remember, and it depends on your society, where you live, and of course how you've been brought up, but normal really is whatever our society deems as the standard, acceptable standard. And once you deviate away from that, then it becomes abnormal. The average person looks at a healthy relationship as one where there isn't abuse. So when you are in a relationship that is having abuse, or where your needs are not being met, I think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you're not having your needs being met, if you're not being valued and understood, then the majority of us are going to say that's not a healthy relationship. But it does, I definitely agree that it does stem from the first examples are your parents. And then it leads me to go, well, if those weren't good examples for you, where are you learning this? Where do you go from there?
Exactly.
And most people, that's why not most people, but that's why people who struggle with relationships, they don't have an example, and you can't fault them for that. So where do you go with that? How do you learn? That's where you're going to get the rebounds, and you're going to keep trying and going through the motions because you never knew where to begin with. You don't have those resources.
Good point. Good.
Well, I'm just thinking about, again, when you said how society establishes what those norms are for people. And I am thinking about like resistance, because again, I can live within a society, but in my household, if this is what has been normal in my home, then this is what feels normal to me. And it does not matter like what, outside of that looks like. And so, like you said earlier about healthy being relative to the person. Again, Georges had brought up an example of what if someone grew up in an abusive household. So where they've seen maybe their mom or father being abused, because we know and understand that, men can be abused as well. So if you have grown up in a household where you have, witnessed that, where maybe you have experienced that, that then is your norm.
Mm-hmm.
So you may then, gravitate towards someone who then is abusive to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so, when someone comes along and says to you, no, this is not normal. Then you're left thinking like, well, what do you mean? This is normal for me.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
And I think that is where, when we talk about like the rumor time process, trying to get people to like recognize,
Exactly.
what normal is, understand, again, like, does it feel good to be beat?
How do you feel when you're getting beat?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So being able to use or rumorize, right? To understand what maybe healthy might look like for them.
Awesome. Yeah. And that took me to a question or a definition, right? I'm looking here on Google. It says here, different people define relationships in different ways, but for a relationship to be healthy, you need a few key ingredients. What exactly do we mean by healthy relationships? What are some of the ingredients?
For me, when I think about healthy relationship, I think it has trust, it's supportive, it isn't controlling, doesn't play games, encourages growth, accepts boundaries, respects differences, isn't afraid of conflict, encourages individuality, wants the best for the other person, whether I like it or not, and doesn't try to change the other person, but instead is helping you to grow with the person.
Is that possible? Go ahead, Vanessa.
You know what? And this is what when I listen to you give the definitions of what healthy looks like for you, the first thing that popped in my mind was the Cosby Show, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And for a lot of people who watched that show, they thought that is like not the norm. That this is something like
a pie in the sky,
right?
Yeah, unattainable.
I wish I could have that, but my reality is that it don't look nothing like that. And so how do you get people then to understand that they can have those things then?
Yeah.
First of all, why does it have to be unattainable? And I think we have to go back to, why are they even thinking that I can't achieve that? What is it that is holding you back from having those things and makes you feel like you're undeserving of that?
Undeserving.
Right?
And so with that, let's go to a commercial break and we will be right back.
Are you and your family seeking healthy mindsets, actions, relationships, knowledge, emotions, resources, and skills? Well, backed by popular demand, GC Scored presents RUMERTIME Family Summer Camp, a social emotional wellness program starting June the 14th to the 26th at the venue St. Michael and All Angels Episcopal Church, Down to the Roots.
You're listening to Access RUMERTIME Conversations, a bi-monthly podcast that focuses on 5 social emotional problem-solving strategies to help you become a conscious problem solver and an empowered life coach. Welcome back to the Access RUMERTIME Conversations podcast.
Wow, you just piggybacked off me so well when you add that. I had to write it down. When you said, in my household, if this is how I grew up, this is the normal for me. And I started thinking about how you can grow up. Just like, think about, I related to being an immigrant. You basically are in a dual type of society. So my mom always used to say, you're American out there, but once you step in this house, you're African, right? So that's how I look at it. And you can be an American but be living in a household that doesn't reflect what the rest of American society is as acceptable and normal.
So
that was excellent when you said that.
What you just said about we have different sub cultures, even within our own homes and within our own communities.
Like a duality.
A duality, right? And what does that do for how does that impact one's ability to have relationships? Because it sounds like we might have to have different relationships inside the house and different relationships outside the house. And outside the house, you're going to have multiple settings, so ecosystems. And so you have to have different relationships in each of those ecosystems.
And we do that all the time.
But I was going to say, isn't that true though? Isn't that what we do?
Right.
I even think about in a work culture as a Black woman, I code switch, right?
Code switching,
So
yes.
When I'm talking to one person, and if I see my brother and sister, I may switch it up. You know, duality. It's different depending on the situation that you're in or the setting that you're in.
Does that code switching make one relationship healthy and the other unhealthy?
Not necessarily. I think it may facilitate more trust and understanding in one relationship versus the other. You may, for example, because I'm able to relate more with a Black person versus somebody who is not Black or of African descent, I'm going to feel more comfortable with that person.
Or someone who understands your culture.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Geneva, you have anything you want to add to this?
I am just in my head, in my heart, applauding what George has had to say in terms of what he described and what makes a relationship work. You asked the question earlier about, is it possible, this thing, is it possible for us to have, that ideal relationship and what it would take? And so those things that George has mentioned, for sure, that has to be developed. Trust. There got to be open communication, so that we can have an appreciation for what everybody is striving for, so we can be supportive of whatever those ideals are, or come to the conclusion that we're not. And so again, we have to trust the process and the people involved enough to be honest, to say, I'm not down with that. Yeah, so you want to go that way? Nah, I don't think I want to go that way. And so, and be able to break ties without breaking somebody's back, or somebody's head or somebody's heart. But, if we can be honest in our communication and receive what the other has to say. I mean, George, as you mentioned, a mouthful of virtues that make for a healthy relationship. And those are the kinds of things that must be taught, because people really don't know. People get involved with relationships for perhaps the wrong reasons, or what they believe is the right reasons. And again, it gets back to what I was sharing earlier about love, and whether people are really ready for this thing called love. I maintain that, you need to know how to love yourself before you can love anybody else. But I don't know that is something that's even thought of, because people look on the outside appearance and they see what they believe is good, and they want some of that, or want to share some of that, and without thought. So I love the RUMERTIME process, because it does focus on our thoughts, our interactions, and our mindsets. If our mindsets is, let me get all I can get, and can all I can, get all I can and can all I get, and then sit on the can.
Mm-hmm.
No, that is not healthy. That is stinking thinking from my perspective.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Georges?
And the one thing for me, like, I had to be very intentional about trying to make sure that I find this healthy love. And the reason why I could spew those things to say this is what healthy means to me, because I've been around a lot of unhealthy behavior. I've been in some unhealthy relationships. And then throughout every relationship, I had to reflect and ask myself, is this something that's going to help me grow and help me to become a better person? Or is this something that's going to make me more frustrated and make me more distrusting for the next person?
Mm-hmm.
And when I realized that those relationships were not good, I was like, okay, it's time for me to go.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But now I'm realizing there's a lot of people who stay longer in relationships because they think they can fix the other person.
Exactly.
And that's why I
Exactly.
agree with you when you say that you have to learn how to love yourself. The first thing for me is I had to stop and say, you know what? I think I need to go get some counseling so I can deal with the stuff that I've been through, just so I can make sure it doesn't make me look at relationships in a way that I shouldn't. Because I've hurt some people when I wasn't trying to hurt them, but because I was hurting, I gave them the only thing that I could give them, which is the love that I thought was love.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
But when I got to some counseling and I dealt with some of those things that was in my closet and I emptied out my closet, I said, you know what? I have to do this in a better way. I know sometimes me and Lynn, we laugh because people say, oh, you guys are like the best couple. You guys are like bagels. And I'm like, we work at it. Like, that's the part that we don't see. We work at it. We talk about our differences. I mean, when I say we're different, she has low blood pressure. I have high blood pressure. We're different. But we look at our differences and we see it as one of our strengths. Why she might look at something and say, George, why don't you think about it this way? I say, okay. And then I look at it from her perspective and I say, oh, wow. And then when it's time for her to deal with something and I see a better way, I can say, babe, why don't you think about it this way? And then we help each other. And we're helping each other to get to a place where we're wishing the best for one another so that we could best be at our peak, at a highest level, to make sure that she hears me and I hear her. And when I hear those love languages come from her, I'm accepting it. And when she hears and sees mine, she's accepting it without any reservation, without anything, because the first thing we did was learn how to love ourselves, and then we learn how to love each other a little bit better.
Absolutely.
Right. And so that is a beautiful
love story.
Love story. Right? That's beautiful.
But it's about work.
With beautiful love story with two people who, you know, have been able to recognize and understand and learn how to manage their thoughts and their interactions, their mindsets and their emotions.
That's right.
And I'm going to pause right there.
Okay.
And then I'm going to now rewind. Okay, just rewind with me in your mind. You had some types of positive foundational mentors or parenting. There was some type, parents were around. You were not adopted. You were not abandoned. You were not displaced. You didn't have you may not have had major traumatic early events in your life. So you were able to develop the ability to just even have the cognitive and the emotional space in your brain and in your heart to recognize. Remember, we've rewounded this now. Think about people who didn't have that.
Exactly.
Right? So, and I'm sure there are going to be people like that listening to us. do they not matter? Are they able to experience? Are they able to get to where you guys are, given the rough beginnings that they may have had?
Yes, I think that's very possible. And I think it's very attainable. The first thing that I can catch from what you said was self-reflect, right? When you are aware, the first step
in the RUMERTIME process is to recognize, which is self-awareness.
And self-awareness.
Yeah.
Now, once you get to that step and realize, I don't even have the resources and the skills to get into a healthy relationship, you have to have some self-reflection. And you have to ask yourself, I tell people all the time when he said, oh, people say that we're bagels or couple goals, whatever. And
what's bagels?
I hate that term so much. I hate goals, relationship goals in general. I hate that so much because you weren't there to see what we went through to get to this step, right? And for somebody who may not have that example, once you do that self-reflection, it's also important to understand that it's okay to be in that singleness, right? To capture yourself, get to know yourself, and understand how to love yourself in order to love someone else, right? And it's also important to ask yourself, are you even ready for a relationship?
Absolutely.
A lot of people don't ask themselves that. We're so quick. You look on social media and relationships and love is just thrown in your face. Not even romantic relationships. I'm talking about with friendships, right? Friendships or casual acquaintances. We're not meant to be alone. But if you don't know how to establish those type of relationships, if you don't have those social skills in general,
social emotional competencies,
you got to start from somewhere. You have to learn those things, and that starts with that reflection. That starts with building those skills up. And it's important to step back and not focus so much on what other people are doing, but really evaluate yourself and what what your needs are. What are you trying to gain from this? I wish more people would do that. And
and so Vanessa, what do you want to say? You look like you want to say a whole lot.
Well, no, I'm just listening. I mean, I think this is great conversation, and I think the thing that I am understanding everybody saying is that it starts with the individual, right? The song that keeps playing in my mind is Good Love.
Okay.
Everybody, Anita Baker.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Way back in
You
the
give
day.
good love?
No, that's
Is that what?
Whitney Houston. That's Whitney.
No, that's
okay.
Whitney Houston.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But Anita Baker did Sweet Love.
Sweet love.
Sweet love. Okay.
Sweet love.
Yes.
That's
it.
That's the jam.
Was too. But I believe being able to, Lynn, I'll say this, like when you asked about, if someone is ready to be in relationship, and I think, one way of looking at that is like, are you ready to be in a relationship with someone outside of yourself? Or is it possible to be in relationship with yourself? Right? Learn to love you.
Yes.
The things that maybe you would like to have from someone else. Learn to give those things to yourself first.
Yes.
So that you understand what it feels like, so that, you can then receive it and then be able to also give that to someone else. So again, when we talk about reflecting and all, being able to learn yourself and understand yourself so that you can prepare yourself for being in relation with someone else once you've learned to be in relationship with yourself.
So then relationship, what I'm hearing us all say is that in order to be in a healthy relationship, you have to first be in a healthy relationship with yourself.
Exactly.
And in order to be able to do that, part of being in a healthy relationship with yourself is really, truly being able to rumorize.
Yes.
It's being able to
Absolutely.
recognize your thoughts, your interactions, your mindset, and your emotions with yourself.
Yes.
Because that's what the rumor time is. Then being able to understand, which is dig deeper. Why do I why do I stay in these kinds of relationships? Why do I see the world in the way I see it? Why does my mom, my dad, my caregivers get under my skin? So that's the understanding. Then how am I managing these relationships? Why am I flying off the handle when my maybe significant other says something, or when I go to school, or when I go to work,
or jumping from one
relationship to the next, like
relationship.
Geneva was saying, right, Geneva?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I love, what Vanessa was just saying about what, in terms of the self-love, about a person taking the time and doing those things for themselves, what they think they might expect someone to do for them. But to treat yourself first, so that you can recognize when you do get connected with someone else, you can recognize, you have a measuring rod for what's good for you. Because if you're treating yourself in a way that you deem is good, that becomes a measuring rod. So when someone else comes into that relationship, they need to at least measure up to that much good and be able to add to that.
Yeah.
But if they are doing less than that or bringing conflict to that, then we have to understand, and make some decisions about whether we will tolerate that or not.
No, absolutely.
There are two quotes that make me really frustrated, but I understand some people go through their own challenges when it comes to toxic relationships. Like as you're talking, like I'm hearing those quotes like vividly in my mind. One of them says, "Stop setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm." And that's hard because I've watched a lot of people stay in toxic relationships because they want to please the other person so bad because they're so scared of being alone. Because the fear of being alone scares them so much that they do unconceivable things because they're like, if you leave, I don't know what to do with myself.
Right.
And the second one says, don't let your loyalty become slavery. It is better to break your own heart. And I'm like, I would rather be lonely than to make myself become slave to someone who's abusing me.
Absolutely.
But there's some people who look at that and they don't know when to break it off. They don't know. So my question to the group is, when do you know it's time to go?
So let's take a break. And when we come back from the break, we will answer that.
All right.
Okay? So we're taking a break now. How would you like to take your life coach with you wherever you go? Well, GC Scored can make that happen for you. Purchase the RUMERTIME Guided Activity Journal on Amazon.com or directly from GC Scored's online store at www.org for the price of $19.99. The Access RUMERTIME Conversations podcast is brought to you by GC Scored and the Leadership Institute, and your co-host, Dr. Yvonne Murray-Larrier, Dr. Geneva Fleming, Vanessa Kelly-Brew, Lynn Prosper, and Georges Prosper. Thank you for listening. Welcome back to the Access RUMERTIME Conversations podcast. So we're back now to segment number 3. And so, Georges, why don't you let's deal with one quote at a time, because each of those quotes are pretty
they're deep,
powerful. It's giving us a lot of thought.
Okay.
Food for thought, I should say.
So we'll start with the first one. Stop setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm.
So stop setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. Okay.
And that sounds to me like someone who is willing to sacrifice themselves to make sure that someone else is happy.
Go ahead.
And I think the thing that I personally have learned, like over the years, and through different experiences, why is somebody else's feelings or happiness more important than my own?
Okay. So I'm gonna throw something in here. All right. What's the
and I have a dimension to throw in there as well.
Yeah. So here's what I'm thinking. The quote says, "Why
Stop setting
yourself on fire to keep someone else
warm."
Yeah. Okay. People who are Christian. That's one of the first principles, right? One of the, at least how I have heard it being interpreted, okay, is that put others before you. It's about being sacrificial and being Christ-like and not being selfish. And so when we see people doing what the quote says, which is
setting yourself on fire so someone else can be warm.
Right. That's almost based in Christian principles.
Well, I think it's based in Christian ignorance.
Okay. Let's hear it.
Let me explain, because I like you mentioned the term Christ-like. And I mean, and the very first thing that came to my mind was that, to be Christ-like, is not without wisdom. And so if we are to emulate and mirror those behaviors, it would not look like that. There used to be the old slogan some years ago about WWJD. What would Jesus do? And from my understanding of Jesus, the Christ, the anointed one, he would not do those things and would not even promote it. In fact, there are some examples in the Bible where he called some things out. So if a person is thinking like that, then their thinking is wrong. It's wrong thinking. And so right thinking and right believing is so important. So, but if they're thinking that way from that spiritual perspective that you just mentioned, that has got to come correct. But Geneva,
yes. That's your perspective and your interpretation based on your context and understanding. There are people who would be able to find scriptural support to say that you are wrong and how they interpret it is correct.
That's the truth. Because to be honest, I'll never forget, I used to hear this story all the time, and it used to make me so upset. They would tell this story about this woman whose husband beat her, and she was in the hospital, and she was hurting, but the pastor came and told her, just keep on praying and keep on loving him because he's still your husband, and you need to stay in this thing and stay in there. Keep fighting the good fight. And I said, he's beating her. They're literally fighting. And the only thing you could tell this woman to do is stay there and get abused. I said, is that what Christ would want for her?
And I'm sure he said yes.
But I maintain what I maintain. And there's a very valid point. And it points to the era that in messages, that people are receiving through this thing called the church, these organizations and leadership. Boy, that's another conversation, y'all, for another day. We can go deeper. I'm just here to say that that message has messed a lot of people up, because people believe what they hear rather than taking the time to rightly divide and understand the word of truth the way it should be. And yes, people bring about their own interpretations to fit their belief system.
Mm-hmm.
But it is wrong. I just maintain it's wrong. And I hear what you're saying, that someone else can come up with a different context. But it is wrong to advise someone to live in a way that's contrary to Christ. And that's just my belief.
That's your belief. Vanessa,
Yeah.
Vanessa, what do you want to say?
So I used to work at a domestic violence shelter.
Mm-hmm.
And we would have women who would come into shelter who had been in abusive relationships and were Christian women,
Mm-hmm.
and had their pastors say to them that very thing: you need to stay in this relationship,
Mm-hmm.
let God work on your
Mm-hmm.
husband, just continue to pray,
Mm-hmm.
and be a good wife to this man.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very difficult
Mm-hmm.
to change that mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
For these women, because they had grown up believing that this was true.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that, for me, I think that comes up is always, is that the kind of love that Christ has for us?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Is Christ's love hurtful?
Mm-hmm.
Is it abusive?
Mm-hmm.
Or
is this what God would want for you?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And and another one is, again, loving thy neighbor as I love myself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so, is this the kind of love that I have for myself? Would I do this to another human being? Would I then also go out and be abusive to someone else? And so just being able to help them for themselves to see the difference. Because again, like we said, it's about like the cultures that we come from, and it's about being able to like reflect
and recognize
for ourselves, and again having a different perspective. So again, it's hard, it's difficult to tell someone that this is what you need to do.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Because I think it's wrong.
Right. Exactly.
And the other piece to that is, what adds to the challenge for an individual is, we talked earlier about the first teachers, like what a person grew up with, what experiences they had from the first family, whether they were biological or not. And if what they witness bears witness with what a pastor or someone is telling them. So if they witness mom being abused by dad, and then now they're in a similar relationship and they're wanting to do the right thing, and they're believing the quote unquote man or woman of God who is telling them to stay in that abusive relationship, then this is one of the reasons why people stay, because they believe that if they're not taking the time to understand, to read and study and understand the word for themselves, and they are going according to the leadership or the individuals who should know, who should be giving proper guidance, that's why I say individuals that counsel that way are messing people up big time.
And it's difficult too, because these are people that they respect
and trust.
Absolutely. And trust. And isn't that one of the things that leads to abuse, especially childhood abuse? That whole trust factor.
Right. And that's how abuse perpetuates
itself,
because it's
the so-called trust
erodes the trust that comes naturally. That's when at the first stages of life. That's what Erik Erikson says, right? The first stage is a trust versus mistrust. Lynn, you wanted to say something.
I wanted to say, I think it's so funny how when when George said that quote, "Don't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm," everyone else thought of romantic relationships, and the first thing that came to mind was like a parental relationship with their child, right? The sacrifices that a parent makes that we look at as, man, I think of my parents and everything they've done for me, and they really set themselves on fire to keep me warm. They would do anything for me. And when I even think about myself, when I become a parent one day, I will do a lot for my kids. But then that leads us into, and this ties into romantic relationships too, that leads into balance. And is it reciprocated back, right? Because even with my mother, as much as she's working those doubles to give me everything that I need, but when she gets home, she expected that the house was going to be clean, right? She would call ahead of time and be like, "Hey, could you put the chicken out to defrost?" That's me, that's reciprocating that love back. You're doing all of that. Let me make life a little bit easier for you, right? So there's a balance, right? And then it also had me thinking, because we were talking about the toxic relationships, but what happens when you have a healthy relationship that shifts, the dynamic shifts, and it ends up being unhealthy? We're talking about relationships in the church, right? We're gonna just say that they start off healthy. It's a godly relationship. You started off wonderful, but what happened that this, say a pastor's wife, is now stuck in the hospital after getting beat? Where did that change?
Where did it go wrong? Turn into unhealthy.
What happened?
Because I think at the root of it all is our humanness. And when we don't deal with our stuff, right? Is that what you agree? You agree?
Yes.
When you don't deal with your stuff, you can have how many relationships you want. You can take God and put him right in the middle of it. You didn't rumorize, and you just messed everything up. And hurt people, as we know. And if you are not, and another thing I heard is, in order to heal, you have to reveal.
Yes.
Right? You have to, and it's the same thing as, in order to manage, you have to know what you're managing. So you have to recognize it and understand it.
Right.
And so it comes back again. This is the thing. I say it to people. It always comes back to the root. You have to recognize. So it doesn't matter what kind of relationship with yourself, with others. If you don't deal with your stuff, it comes back here.
How do you heal if you don't know the root of the problem?
You can't. You can't, right? You can't, as a nurse, you can't give me medication for something I don't know what.
Exactly.
You're just giving me medication, and you didn't ask me what is wrong. That's a malpractice. That's a lawsuit. So
and in that analogy that was just mentioned about a pastor and a pastor's wife, sadly, instead of doing some reflection about what just happened here, is this right? Is this how God would want me to be treated? To save face, or to keep the public from thinking of us a certain way, people stick and stay, and they try to cover that up. But we can't cover it up. It's like trying to cover up a bad sore. It's going to fester, and it's going to get soiled, and it's going to expose. Talk about reveal. That would be the great reveal,
right?
And, so it's best to go ahead and reveal and express and talk about, well, hey, what just happened? I know that I'm talking, but it is not an easy thing.
It's not easy
for people who've been married 30, 40, and 50 years, and suddenly they find themselves on the opposite side of what they thought was real.
Right.
And I ties back to the other question that you had when you said, how do we know when it's time to leave, right?
Mm-hmm.
When, because you can stick it out as much as you want to, but if this relationship is not beneficial for you, and if it's becoming unhealthy and your needs are not being met, you have to understand that you come first. And that's a very tough decision to make for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
And so, we're going to pick this conversation up again in a couple of weeks.
It's a hot topic.
It's a hot topic.
I'm glad you said that.
Because I want to, we've talked a lot about physical abuse in relationships. And there's a silent killer in relationships that you don't necessarily see, right? Which is the emotional abuse and the psychological abuse, the interactional abuse, if that's a word, and attitudinal abuse. Because, it doesn't have to be verbal, it could be attitude.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't have to say anything to you.
There you go. Silent treatment, right? That's attitude, right? And so, and a lot more people, I believe, struggle with that in relationships.
I agree.
And they're not able to articulate it because they don't have the vocabulary to say, to identify, to recognize what is it I am experiencing here.
Exactly.
I'm not getting hit. I'm not getting cussed out. I'm not getting embarrassed in public, but I am just feeling like a caged bird. I cannot be me.
The relationship is out of balance. They know it's out of balance.
And so next time we will pick up this conversation. Anybody has, let's give like 10 seconds of what you want to say before we leave. Everybody gets 10 seconds. Let's do 10 seconds. What's your 10-second parting words?
I think my 10-second parting words is remember to love yourself during this season. Outside of everyone else, love yourself.
All right. Thanks, Georges.
I think my 10 seconds would just be that be more self-aware, rumorize, self-heal, and understand why you are the way you are. And that way you'll be able to move forward and build your relationships.
Awesome. Thanks, Lynn.
All right. I'm just gonna, for my 10 seconds, I have a quote from Bob Marley.
All right.
And one of the quotes that he said in regards to love, relationships is strong roots bear sweet fruit. All right. Okay.
Awesome. Awesome. Geneva, what's your 10 seconds?
Yeah, make a decision to love on yourself, to reflect and pay attention to yourself. And the first thing I would recommend to do is to unplug from the media, social media, TV, all of those things, brainwash us.
10 seconds. 10 seconds, Geneva. 10 seconds.
Unplug.
Unplug. All right. Unplug. My 10 seconds is, as air is to life, so are social emotional competencies to relationships. Peace.
Peace out.
You have been listening to the Access RUMERTIME Conversations podcast, where the time is always RUMERTIME, where we equip you to solve your problems one rumor at a time, where we educate you to transform your stories one rumor at a time, and where we empower you to become your own life coach one rumor at a time. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.